All right. Howdy, y'all. Thanks for sticking around, and great to be back at BitBlockBoom. Really excited to talk to everybody today about vaults and networks. This is something I've been fortunate enough to be a part of helping to build at Unchained for the past several years, and I think it really opens up a lot of opportunities really for the whole ecosystem. And I want to start by issuing this challenge, this idea of, I think Bitcoin inarguably brought about a monetary revolution, changed the way that we think about money, how we interact with money. But on the technology side, are we seeing a technological revolution or maybe just an evolution? And the reason why I ask that is I think that for a lot of the businesses that we see being built on top of Bitcoin, typically what we're seeing are what I like to think of as, or refer to as, fiat wrappers with just a different asset in the database in the back end. Nothing really changing about how we interact with our businesses. And if you think about what it means to be a revolution versus an evolution in technology, obviously, like, the internet and even AI now are pretty good examples of this, right? And what they do is they change how we not just interact with technology, but they open up entire new industries and possibilities that weren't really possible before, right? So there were these evolutions in communications technologies, but with the internet, all of a sudden, rather than talking peer-to-peer, we're creating whole new networks of communication channels, of industries that weren't even possible before. You have new value chains that are developed. So before I talk about how I think we can rethink how to have that type of technological revolution, I want to rewind a little bit and just talk about how the way in which we interact with our Bitcoin has evolved over time. So way in the beginning, when you first have the original Satoshi client and people are running their wallets and their miners on their laptops, our wallets were basically just a random collection of keys in a wallet.dat file on your computer. This was problematic. That was really hard to back up, really hard to recover, nothing deterministic about it. And that's where you start to see the people that are, digging through garbage dumps to try and recover their Bitcoin. We had some innovations in the space around hierarchical deterministic wallets, extended public keys. This allowed us to back up our keys, not just in this database that we had to have hard backups for, that you have to be technical enough to back those up. And it brought things like seed phrases and devices that could do this for us too. So that was a really nice change with how we interacted with our Bitcoin. On the technical side and the scripting side, we had new opcodes. One of the most important ones that we had in Bitcoin in early days was pay-to-script hash. This allowed us to encode complex spending conditions, the most important of which, in my opinion, being multisig, in a compact way that made it efficient to spend to. So it improved the user experience. We also had other opcodes, such as check lock time verify, that allowed us to do other more complex things. So pay-to-script hash is really an important step there. One reason was we needed one more advancement in how we interact with Bitcoin to make things like time lock more possible with Miniscript. Time locks were possible before Miniscript, but with Miniscript, it allowed us to, again, back it up. Right? It made it more portable, more secure, more verifiable. So this is a really important change. In parallel to these changes of how we interacted with our keys, and therefore our Bitcoin, the custody landscape also has evolved. In the very beginning, we had self-custody, all right? So not just the wallet.dat files, but even people doing it themselves once we had, the seeds and everything. And that was pretty good, right? That's the goal of Bitcoin. But of course, as we've seen, there's plenty of stories of it's really hard to do properly. And if we're thinking about Bitcoin being for everybody, we need it to be accessible to everybody. So this was a bit problematic. So it evolved, and the market tried to address this problem. And what it brought about were these custody providers. Again, pretty good. They were solving a real problem. But this was the Wild West. People didn't know how to do security properly, or the people that were doing Bitcoin custody really did not have experience in doing financial services at scale and the type of security that are needed. And there were some problems, right? we created these new central points of failure. Rather than just an individual that could have their Bitcoin lost, you basically have honeypots of whole classes of individuals that could lose access to their Bitcoin. But I don't want to overstate this risk. Now, obviously, I have a stake in saying that, like, trusting custodians is you shouldn't do it. But I think it's worth highlighting that the market has evolved, where there are a lot of really, really secure, really well-run custodial providers out there. We don't see a lot of these type of high-profile hacks anymore, and that's a really good thing. The market has evolved and is providing this. But there's still issues there. One of the things that I like to think about is we think about protecting our private keys, right? And then you're trusting a custodian. Your access to your account now becomes your private key, right? If you just think about a private key being the thing that gives you access to your Bitcoin, your account is now your private key. And not only is this a problem in terms of hackers, but sometimes you can be locked out of your account for perfectly understandable miscommunication reasons. But if you lose access to your account and that is your private key, you've lost Bitcoin. You've lost access to your Bitcoin. Oh, they don't show GIFs. That's annoying. I don't know if you're seeing it, but they're doing a handshake. So collaborative custody has been an ecosystem that has been evolving and developing over the past 10 years or so. And the idea here is trying to get the best of both worlds, right? You get a trusted partner in a collaborative custody institution, but you get to still control your keys in a self-sovereign way. But this, again, is not without its trade-offs, because the account holder is still a single point of failure. And now, while access to your account, right, like with a lot of the collaborative custody solutions out there, including, of course, Unchained, you can back up your wallet, you can use your wallet outside of Unchained, but you as the account holder are still a single point of failure. If you are convinced to spend your Bitcoin improperly, your Bitcoin will be lost. This happens all the time. Now, why I'm talking about from vaults to networks is because I believe, we as a company at Unchained believe that networks are how we improve this situation. We have networks everywhere, from transportation networks to communication networks to networks of people, social networks. The strength of networks is that they introduce redundancy, such that if one edge in that network or one node in that network fails, the network as a whole still remains resilient.
BitBlockBoom started because we were outsiders, and we needed a place that felt like home. Stockyards were always a place for people who didn't fit in. Let's go take a look at the cow town. Put on your hat, let's go. Stockyards weren't just a cattle town. It was a place for cattlemen, traders, outlaws, and gamblers, people that were building something new. And that sounded familiar. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were known to spend time here, and Bonnie and Clyde stayed right here in the Stockyard Hotel. Hotels were great, but they're too normal, and Bitcoin is anything but normal. So we moved BitBlockBoom to a place with some edge and some history. They still run Longhorn Steer down this street every day, just like they did 100 years ago. And BitBlockBoom, well, it's just a few steps away. This is Mule Alley. This is where relationships are made. Bars, restaurants, rodeos, hangouts. Mule Alley is the place to come when the BitBlockBoom day is done. BitBlockBoom was built for people who didn't have a home, and the same thing applies to the stockyards. Seems like we finally found a home. See you at the stockyards.
Networks. Okay. So what was I just saying? Networks, improve resiliency. You remove the single points of failure. And why is this important? In social engineering attacks, they target you, not your keys, as a single point of failure. So some of the more common attacks we're seeing now, they target two weak points for the individuals. A sense of urgency, which reduces your ability to think clearly, and building up trust over a long period of time that make you vulnerable to making bad decisions. And this, like collaborative custody, in the classic model of like 2 of 3, where you hold 2 keys, does not solve this problem. Networks, though, do. Because what they allow you to do, if you can build on top of collaborative custody, to build out networks, to expand the resiliency of it, you can build what's known in security circles as a Swiss cheese model of security. The idea being is that there is no perfect security. Everything has trade-offs. The perfect security is cut yourself off from all technology, go live out in the wilderness somewhere. Well, that's not a possibility. You can't operate at scale, right? So what you do is you build out layers of security. Each individual layer on its own is vulnerable to certain attacks. If you pile on different layers with different vulnerabilities, you can protect yourself on the whole from the attacks actually getting access, in this case, to your Bitcoin. So a good way to think about this is the Uncle Jim model, right? Bitcoiners, we know this, like we're, especially at a conference like this, we've all had the experience of onboarding friends or family members, right? You become the Uncle Jim. Now, while my personal security it's never going to be as good as a Coinbase, or how an Unchained itself protects its key, you can have a certain level of trust with me, as a family member can, such that it's harder to do the type of urgency scams, right? So if I enter into a family member's security network of holding their keys, they trust me to be available to sign. And if anything were to happen to my friend or family member for whom I'm an Uncle Jim, they would have to come to me before spending. They don't even have to go to Unchained, right? This immediately breaks down most of the social engineering attacks that we see, because it takes a lot of work to build out that sense of urgency, to build out the trust. And as soon as you talk to somebody, I know people that are very technical, that are very security aware, that can be vulnerable to these attacks. And then you'll see these stories on Twitter sometimes. It's like there's one moment where they like snap out of it. What if that moment was you just talking to your family member? That's where networks really change the model of custody. But not just that, we're talking about a technological revolution here, right? We're talking about building entirely new ways of thinking about businesses, building things that were not possible before. And so one of the things that we're seeing at Unchained, for example, is something that's called the donor-advised funds. Now, these have existed forever. Now, you could have a donor-advised fund that's just a fiat wrapper with a different backend. Or you can think, what can we do differently, not just with this different asset, this monetary revolution, but what can we do from a technological standpoint that was not possible before? You could start leveraging the technical benefits that we're talking about here with the networks. You can also create a system where your donors have an active relationship with the donor-advised fund rather than a passive relationship. Now, the donor is not moving the funds on their own, but they can see the wallet. A donor in this type of system, where they are in the network, not just having an account to look at their balances, but they can load up their account balance in Sparrow. They can verify that you can do proof of keys yourself without any crazy cryptographic schemes. This totally changes the way that we operate, not just with the money itself, but with the technology and what we can build. Another thing I want to focus on is the idea of how we can build these businesses in ways that weren't possible before, right? So we call this, I call this flexible quorums, right? So not just like predefining like, oh, we really like this model, but just the idea of flexible quorums, which is that different models make sense for different businesses or different security assumptions and different security trade-offs. And you can build businesses on top of this flexibility. Again, not just the Bitcoin and the security itself. So most of what we see in the space today, we'll see 2 of 3 or 3 of 5. And we call this sovereign access models, right? Where you as a user control you control a majority of the quorum. We're building these tools out because they're being built by us Bitcoiners that like that self-sovereignty. And so these types of retail arrangements are kind of targeted for us. It's like, I want to control my keys. Well, again, we know some of the drawbacks with that. But I think it's even missing out some of the other opportunities that we can have. There are these areas where you can think of an agent failsafe, where if you are building out something that is already regulated, that is already going to have KYC, we heard about HSAs earlier, we were talking about donor-advised funds, retirement accounts with IRAs, Bitcoin is a better money to back that. Being able to access that in case of an emergency is really important. But in 99.9% of situations, you don't mind if institutions are moving those funds too. They're regulated already, right? And so you can create these setups with like a 2 of 4, where I own 2 keys for my retirement account. A service provider might have 1 key, and then a lawyer might have the 4th key. So you would still require collusion to move the funds. But if I wanted to put one or both of my 2 keys into deep cold storage so that they're really secure, so I am not vulnerable or my keys are not vulnerable, and I just wanted to request, I wanted to leverage those networks to just request a signature to move those funds, you got it, right? These are things that are not possible before, not just because of the new money, but because of the new technology. Another thing that I think it kind of like highlights how we're building these fiat wrappers is a lot of our Bitcoin systems today still require you to have access to their walled garden for you to interact with this new money. And that means we're still depending on trust, right? The don't be evil rather than can't be evil model, right? So we've seen a lot of these institutions that have had these, or the unbanking of Bitcoiners, for example, right? The problem is that this can happen in Bitcoin too. And the incentive mechanisms in regulated entities are such that institutions are incentivized to act proactively on behalf of the regulators. So financial institutions, whether or not they're Bitcoin or they're, in crypto or whatever, you're incentivized to flag users that might be having a suspicious activity, freeze their account just in case, and let the users file for to remove that lock. If you have to access the walled garden, doesn't matter even if you have one of the keys. You've lost access to your Bitcoin, right? Well, luckily, Bitcoin also gave us a way that we do not have to depend on access to the walled garden. We do not have to access on those servers. And Unchained and other institutions that provide collaborative custody, you can leverage descriptors. Descriptors are a way to make your wallet portable. So you can log into Unchained, for example, to access your wallet, or you can load up that descriptor into Sparrow or Caravan and interact with your wallet. You can use your own node to make sure that the balances are correct, to broadcast your own transactions. This is how Bitcoin infrastructure should be built. Not only that, but again, we're talking about the potential for a technological revolution here. And the nice thing about open standards and an open network is that you can have totally new business models that are built on top of it. Zapright is an interesting example here because Zapright does allow you to plug into existing APIs, but the way that they interact with Unchained, with the way that they interact with platforms that give you access to your wallet configuration file, is you can just upload that JSON file directly to Zapright, and all of a sudden you're interacting with your Unchained account. No special API key necessary, no special security setup necessary, no special relationship between different companies necessary. And Zapright didn't have to ask permission to do this. It was just there. That's the power of building on top of open standards, building on top of networks. So we're not just building the Bitcoin network of keys here. There's a new network that developed based off of these standards themselves between multiple different companies. The last standard I wanted to mention here that's really important for this portability, there's another GIF here that highlighted this. But so PSBTs, that's a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. A PSBT is something that allows us to, it's a standard that allows us to collaboratively construct a transaction. Because it's a standard, I can basically say, here, I can say to my business partner, for example, or Alice can say to Bob and Charlie, here are the outputs I want to spend to. Here are the inputs I want to spend to do that. Would you be willing to sign this transaction? We can do that collaboratively. Again, without the walled garden, without signing into the application, you can all of a sudden build this transaction without depending on access to the service provider. This can enable a lot of interesting things. For example, like air-gapped signing, sending transactions over email. One really interesting thing is you can have a key signer that doesn't even have an account on the platform that's managing this wallet, because the keys themselves could have been exported independently, no user account, sent over there. And then when you need a signature, they don't have to log into an account. You just ask them to sign it. You take it back. You put it up onto the platform. This is now possible within Unchained behind a feature flag, but you can have this type of extra level of collaboration. And again, without any API. This is just using standards. So to wrap up my presentation here, I thought it would be fun to try and build a theoretical business model that would not have been possible without not just Bitcoin as money, but Bitcoin as a technology. And so these are kind of like the criteria that I set up for myself for this idea. What we're going to try and do is, conveniently enough, build something that was discussed earlier today. We're going to build out a health savings account provider, an HSA service provider, but with these specific criteria. It's easy to say, okay, I just want to have an HSA that's backed by Bitcoin instead of stocks, right? Or instead of dollars. I want my HSA to have these criteria where I can bring my own keys. I want the clients to be able to build out their network of who is protecting their Bitcoin. I want to be able to spend my HSA without having to log into a bunch of different accounts. So it's funny, just watching some of the presentations earlier today, I've revised how this might look like a little bit, but this is still applicable. And one of the interesting things about building on networks, building on this technology, is you can actually have this type of flexibility. So I, as the HSA provider, either can't or don't want to have the full liability of being able to move the funds for the customer, right? So I'm going to leverage a platform that has no expertise in HSAs, but does have expertise in key agency and providing this collaboration tool. I have the expertise in HSAs, and my clients have the expertise in where they want to move their money. So this is how we're building out our network for this product. And what we end up with is the best of both worlds, where you have both sovereign access, where the client can spend their funds, and an agent fail-safe, where I, as the HSA provider, and the platform provider for the key agency would have to collude to move the funds. Or if we validate that the client is asking for that, they can. Now, the thing that I learned today is that actually you have the HSA's administrators who are often going to be different from the HSA provider, and they might actually want to have a key on here. And you can swap out one of the client keys for this, or you can swap out the HSA provider there. Again, we get a lot of flexibility to build out a business model that would not have been possible before. We got descriptors now too. That means this wallet that is tax advantaged in an HSA that you want to be able to spend anywhere, that you want to be able to spend from your own wallet with its own special features, is portable. Now, what does that mean? That means not only could you track your balances against your own node, potentially spend your balances from your own node depending on your quorum, but I, as the HSA provider, can insert my application requirements into Claude Code, spin up a few agents, and build up an application that is built on top of descriptors. I want to say, this application will support my users by importing a descriptor, pointing to my own Bitcoin D nodes. You have to be able to read the RPC credentials to talk to Bitcoin D. And you might not be able to see it in the picture here, but the platform provider is doing the key agency is not an expert on HSAs. I'm an expert on HSAs, and I know the tax reporting that needs to be done at the end of the year. I know when the withdrawals have to happen. I know how my customers are going to have to do UTXO tagging and transaction tagging. I can build that out on my platform after the wallet's already created, right? And that wallet is transportable. You can take it anywhere. I didn't get into all of the things that you can potentially do, but there are things like blinded XPubs. So you can build out privacy. You can do, you can bring XPubs out from that, again, from users that are not even in the platform. You can do PSBTs. You can send signing requests via email. I could email remotely the HSA provider. As a user, I could email the HSA provider with a PSBT I want to sign. They can finish up the signature. They can send it to the key agencies and broadcast it. So again, you get all of this flexibility. So the thought I want to leave everybody with here is that a lot of what we focus on is how Bitcoin changed the narrative around strong money, right? Sound money. It flipped the script on how we interact with our wealth. But the network of Bitcoin users and the standards that Bitcoin were built on top of can actually do the same with our own financial system. We don't have to be okay with the same old business models. We don't have to be okay with interacting with our Bitcoin, this new money, in the same ways we always have. Takes a little bit of work, takes a little bit of ingenuity, some risk, but the tools are all there. And note that I didn't even talk about any new opcodes, any new soft forks, no Taproot. As much as I personally love covenants, you don't even need that for a lot of this stuff. We're just talking about plain old multisig, pay to witness script hash. We've had this for 10 years, and you can do a lot. So that's all I got. We got some time for questions, but thank you everybody for having me. Any questions? We've got 5 minutes, or my timer says 5 minutes. 5 minutes? All right. Well, thanks very much, y'all. Oh, we got a question. Oh, it's just Tidwell is not going to be a serious question. Come on, I got 3 minutes.
Wow, what a great presentation that was. I would say probably the best presentation today, easily by a large margin, which it says more about you than the rest, because you had some strong competition. I think for this audience, you just mentioned descriptors, and I thought that was really interesting. I think this is a very important thing for people to know about, especially for like self-sovereignty and really keeping up with Bitcoin. Can you help people understand what the hell a descriptor is? Because I think that person right there didn't quite understand it.
That guy.
And I just really want to make sure people understand how cool that is.
Well, I appreciate you asking the question. And so descriptor is, you don't need it to interact with Bitcoin, and you don't even really need it to interact with multisig, because multisig came with other standards that let us do the same thing. But you can think about a descriptor. Remember we talked at the very beginning about how to do backups and the evolution of standards that made it safer to do backups. So a descriptor is a way, it's a subset of miniscript, if you're familiar with that. And miniscript and descriptors are basically a pseudo like programming language for how to define a Bitcoin wallet. So you basically say in a descriptor, it's better with an example. So if you guys can see this here, so what this says is you can look at this at a glance, and it's even easier for a machine. And I can tell that this is a witness script hash wallet. That's the WSH. And within that witness script hash wallet, it is sorted multi. So you can have unsorted multi with the keys, and unsorted would be like you have to take these keys in this order. Sorted just means it used the standard to sort the keys. So the order of the keys here doesn't actually matter. And then there's a number 2. What that's saying is that this sorted multi-sig needs 2 signers to be validated. And then there's this list of 4 items here. So that's also telling me it's a 2 of 4. And if you see the 0, semicolon 1, that's telling me we're talking about a wallet here. Because you can have descriptors that are not a wallet on its own, but this is telling me that I can construct 2 different individual descriptors for the receive addresses and the change addresses that are at subpath 0 and 1, using this set of XPubs at these paths with this root fingerprint. So what this is saying is that this is the shape of a wallet. And what this means is that I can take this information, I can plug it into Sparrow, and Sparrow will be able to recreate the exact same wallet that Unchained would, that Sound HSA would, that Caravan would, that Bitcoin Core would. And so if you can recreate that wallet in a secure way, that it's fault tolerant, basically, that allows for the portability. And that means you can also do the signing, because if you can recreate the wallet, that means you can recreate the spending conditions for individual addresses, which means you can tell your signing device, hey, this is how I need you to sign this transaction. Descriptor is the path that you need to get there. So it's a programming language that allows you to recreate wallets. Thank you for asking the question. One more.
Because since you were asked about that, could you tell us more about blinded
XPubs?
Blinded XPubs.
So real quick, that blinded XPubs are really cool. They don't use, what's fun about them is they don't use any fancy cryptography. They are usable with most standard off-the-shelf signing devices. What it is it allows you to have collaborative custody. So you're using different key signers. But if I don't want one of my key signers to have visibility into my balances, I can't let them know which key of theirs I'm using. So real quick, how it technically works, I got 5 seconds, is that so Alice gives Bob an XPub. Bob takes that XPub, which has a derivation path, like what you can see here. I use a random number generator to add 4 random paths onto that. So it's enough entropy that Alice would not be able to grind through her own key and look for addresses derived from that key on the blockchain, which means that I can use that wallet, I can receive balances to that wallet, and Alice would never know, or Bob would never know, what her key is being used for. The one downside in this, despite its portability, which is fantastic, is that as soon as Bob needs Alice to sign, you have to reveal the path to Alice, and that loses that privacy. But if you're doing this with an institution that is your break glass in case of emergency, in 99% of cases, that's actually a worthwhile trade-off, especially for something that is so portable that works with existing standards. Almost all devices support it. So because there's other protocols out there that have even more privacy, but very little support because they require more novel cryptography. So blinded XPubs, very cool. You can play around with it in Caravan today. So caravanmultisig.com if you want to try it out. It's risky, though. If you lose access to the path, you can't sign, you can't spend from this wallet anymore. So very important to keep that backup. All right. Thank you all.